Welcome, everybody, to this episode of the Ecoustics Podcast. I'm your host and producer, Mitch Anderson. Been looking forward to this episode for a hot minute. If you look at the very first episode of the Ecoustics Podcast, it's all about vinyl and where it was 3 years ago from our perspective. And then now, 3 years later, we are talking with Billy Fields, VP of Sales at Warner Music Group, and Chris Muratore. I'm going to do that one more time. Chris Muratore, Director of Partnerships at Luminate. And we also have ecoustics founder and CEO Brian Mitchell. Welcome, all three of you, to this episode that I am really stoked to be hosting. To get right to it, amongst so many other things, we're going to be talking trends in the vinyl record industry, a little bit also about just the physical market of music in some form. But first and foremost, wanted to talk about the recent happenings here in late 2024 for archival purposes. Got to date ourselves about a report that was dropped where it said vinyl record sales had dropped 33% when the actual numbers were vinyl was up 6.2%. And you guys can correct me, obviously, but that number was year to date, I believe, from last year to when that report came out. And Billy or Chris, I don't know which one of you wants to take that question first, but I'm just wondering, like, kind of what happened there, because it kind of blew up.
Yeah, no, unfortunately it did. It was, unfortunately, people did not use the correct figures when looking at a year over year to create an accurate representation of what the true growth was of vinyl music. And part of the problem is that at the end of 2023, Luminate did away with their old weighting methodology of sales for independent record stores. And the new modeling that was being built was not ready until June of 2024. So there was a big lag of 6 months, basically, where you were looking at a number that was not truly representing the entire marketplace of independent record stores. So when you looked at a year over year, you were seeing that the numbers looked like things were drastically down when that was not reality, right? That was just looking at two different methodologies, and you looking at apples and oranges, right, at the end of the day. So the the way that we look at this information now to try and give you a complete year-over-year picture is we removed the independent record stores from the analysis to look at all the other vinyl sales that occur in the marketplace year over year, that where the modeling didn't affect those sales that were occurring at all those other traditional retail outlets. And we took that and we did a year over year analysis there. And that's what you see here on the screen here. And now vinyl through the end of October is up 2.1% over 2024. And again, this is not including sales that take place at independent record stores in order to give you a true, accurate year over year picture.
Billy?
So I'm going to add a few things to what he just said, which doesn't refute anything that Chris has just put on the table. Those are all accurate numbers, 100%. So I want to just explain real quick the idea of modeling for people that are listening to this that have no idea what this means. Essentially, in the U.S., there's sort of an accepted number of independent record stores of around 1,800. I think it stretches basically from 1,500 to anywhere north of like 2,500. But I think that we're starting to try to look at a universe of, say, 1,800 storefronts in the U.S.
Okay.
But the number of stores that are actually reporting into Luminate via a data partner called Street Pulse is presently about, Chris, correct me if I'm wrong, but it's probably about 30% of that.
We're at now roughly 400 independent locations, record store locations reporting in. And by the way, that number, just so you know, is the largest representation of independent record stores in the history of tracking sales through POS going back to the beginning of SoundScan. So the independent record stores have never been more highly represented in the industry figures and charts than they are today.
Is that tracking both new and used direct to consumers? Just new.
Only
just
new.
new.
Only.
Yes.
Okay.
So the modeling that Chris was speaking about is taking the data from the stores that we have and extrapolating that data to cover what we believe the universe of record stores to be. And that's where you have a break. That's why year over year, we can't have a typical normal year over year review, because that segment of our market is simply unmeasurable from last year to this year. Not only because the weighting methodology previously is not the same as the methodology in 2024, but also because, to Chris's point, we now have the largest number of storefronts reporting in to Luminate to measure the market. And last year it was about a third of the number that we have now. So both the number of reporters and the method of that reporting is vastly different. The other thing I'd say is that because this chart now shows the market without independent retail, that historically, going back over the last 15 years or so, when you look at how vinyl has performed in the US and how independent retail has performed in the US, the independent retail sector typically outperforms the overall market by some version of mid to high single digits. This is in usually both formats, CD and LP. LP has been a bit more aggressive. And certainly now that we're going into our 18th year of growth, that's still something that we look at internally, sort of from the market side of things, as to how that segment of the market is doing.
And based on that, what Billy just said there of how independents perform when it comes to vinyl, and take into the fact that independents currently, if we look at this period of from June to present, independents represent 41% of all vinyl album sales. So you can see what a large segment they represent and what they mean to this market and to the sales of vinyl. So taking to what Billy just mentioned and noting that they account for 41% of all vinyl, that 2.1% number would look different if we had a way to
right
do it year
I guess
over
what's interesting about that, 40% of the vinyl album sales are not shown in this graph that we're showing, and that is accounting for the 2% growth in the first half of 2024. So that seems like a large chunk, but as Billy was saying, if independent stores outperform or they track very similar to, I guess you would call this retail.
Yes. Yeah.
Retail sales, which would be like online sales and large.
Everything.
Boxes.
Yeah.
Everything.
That's
from
segment.
Chains to mass merchandisers like Target and Walmart, and direct to consumer and so forth.
Okay, that makes sense. So what a quick question that I have with it is what is the importance of the differentiator between like Billy being VP of sales at Warner Music Group and like selling to retail stores? So there's that wholesale style statistic. And then Chris at Luminate, you are tracking the consumer purchasing trends. Big differences. Big differences at price points, big differences at volume in those two worlds. But from the industry's perspective, why is it important to have those two different metrics?
Well, I guess I'll correct you in a way without actually talking about Warner Music Group's business specifically, right?
Mm-hmm. Sure.
Yeah, I play a role that is selling our wares to the retail base.
Right.
But that's really not something that is in conflict or is in comparison to what is sold to the consumer. So we have a job of essentially covering our market share in the market, and obviously everyone else is covering the rest of that market. So for me, it's more about how can I best understand where the market is at present? What's it doing? What are the trends? Where is it moving? What are the things that we have to be aware of? Are there threats to the overall growth of the format? And then I think that, and I don't want to put words in Chris's mouth, but what Chris is trying to do is he's trying to work with the data collection process at Luminate to ensure that the retail market in the US is captured as accurately as possible, so that then that flashes back to both the retailers that are participating, but also all of us on the back end, so we can make decisions about what it is we want to do, right?
Sure.
So I think if you looked at it a different way, Mitch, it would be the financial markets decide to look at the music business in one way, and then we all have to do it the way that best works with ourselves and what our release schedules are and sort of what our own plans are, right? It's just,
Yeah.
it is two different levels of looking at the same market. And obviously you're going to engage that market in a different way.
Chris?
Yes. And, to Billy's point, we, Luminate wants to capture as much consumption that is possible, right? We want to capture the entire marketplace, right? And for the most part, outside of missing a chunk of independent retail record stores that are not reporting, as Billy mentioned, we capture basically everything else out there directly. There's not really much that we're missing when it comes to the sales of new vinyl or any other products that we report on a daily basis. So we are constantly looking at new non-traditional type of retail outlets that maybe are going to be carrying vinyl, and there's been a lot of that, right? I mean, there's, as a product segment grows, there's always, and record companies are always looking, where else can we put physical products in, right?
Sure.
What other retail outlets? We'll be bringing on a few new providers come the new year. One of them being Barnes & Noble college bookstores, right?
Okay,
that's
sure.
a perfect segment. Again, that's not being captured today. It's fairly new to the marketplace. But again, it might not be this huge amount of data, but we want to capture as much data as possible to truly get a full representation of what people are buying out there in the market. So we're always adding as many people as possible when it comes to what people are buying.
So Brian, before I hit it over to you, just one quick thing. Would this be a correct example for listeners out there of like Chris, if I was thinking about opening up a record store, I would it would be important to me, I think, to know kind of what's my customer base. I mean, how much are customers actually buying? Is that a way that this data could be, utilized?
Oh yeah, it's definitely, I mean, as an independent record store owner, I mean, obviously they're very knowledgeable, right? They've been in the business, they know what products are selling for the most part, but they don't know necessarily exactly how the market is performing within where their store is located, right? And so they know what they're selling, but if we're able to show them, hey, this is the activity that's happening in your market where your store is located, it gives them a benchmark to work off of, and it enables them, and we send them weekly charts in return for sharing their data with us. And they are able to see, wow, okay, these are titles that are moving up and down that chart when it comes to vinyl sales on a given week. And it helps them, hey, maybe there's an opportunity. Maybe I'm not carrying something that I see is moving up the chart. Or maybe when it's time to reorder something, I see a title that is sort of drifting down the chart a little bit. Maybe I don't need to reorder at the same volumes as before because I see the trend is slowly, going downward. So it can help them in numerous ways to really understand the marketplace and how to help them better run their store.
Thank you. Brian?
Yeah, I'd like to pull us back a little bit and give us some little broader context of how Luminate has been tracking, how the company came to be and how the methodology has changed. And then for those watching on the video, I have some RIAA statistics of vinyl sales over the last 50 years, which you can start to see the trend in recent years, but it's still not what it was in the 70s, 80s,
pre-digital
and whatnot. So, Chris, I'll let you kind of give some background into Luminate.
Yes. So SoundScan started in 1991. The two founders, Mike Fine and Mike Shallett, started the company that really sort of revolutionized the music industry, that really for the first time provided actual POS information and sales information on what was selling in the United States when it came to music. The charts, when Billboard, launched their first chart using SoundScan data versus the data methodology that they were using before, the chart was drastically different, right? And it was eye-opening. It put genres on the map that people didn't realize were selling at the quantities that they were selling.
That's cool.
People said that, country and rap music all of a sudden, became like eye-opening as far as the volumes of what people were buying when it came to the titles in those genres. It really revolutionized how people started using data in the music industry to really run their businesses, from the major record companies to artist management to publishers. To every segment of the industry now had a tool that really showed actual real trends from week to week of what consumers were buying in stores. So that in 1991, it grew. I started in SoundScan in 1994. Actually, I was recruited by Mike Fine and Mike Shallett to come join their company and run their retail division. That they needed somebody, and I slowly just grew within the organization to really became into not only the retail side, but also data analyst and insights. I did a lot of the presentations for the company and so forth. So I was very close to the data. I helped as things rolled out, like all of a sudden the internet came, right? And all of a sudden we had people buying music online and this company called Amazon, right? And so we had to go out and we had to strike deals with all the .coms, right, to report their data into us, to represent what is selling. So that kept changing, right? As the technology changed, how people consumed music changed. Then all of a sudden you had iTunes, and we had to go and we had to get the digital information now to sort of be included into the figures and the charts and streaming. And so that evolution just continued to happen over time. Nielsen took over the company at a given point in time. I think it was in the early 2000s that happened. And then that evolution continued once Nielsen diversified and they started to change their strategy. They sold off the SoundScan piece, and they it merged with another company called MRC, which owned Billboard at that time as well. And then there's this whole tricky evolution that happened over the course of a number of years that ultimately up to I think it was 2 or 3 years ago, where Luminate basically was rebranded as the new MRC, which previously was SoundScan. So you went from SoundScan in the early 90s to now Luminate. It's the same strategy as far as what we're looking to accomplish, and that is to measure what consumers and how consumers are engaging with music, whether it's what they're buying, what they're listening to on the radio, what they're streaming. And that will continue to grow, right? As the industry expands and continues to change, we're here to make sure that we're measuring the marketplace for our clients, for the industry, and being able to give them a tool that really represents what consumers are doing all around music.
And just add one thing, Chris, if you wouldn't mind, would you please explain the relationship between Luminate and Billboard, so the people that are listening can understand like how charts are built and sort of what your role in that is?
Yeah, so Luminate and Billboard are owned by the same parent company, yet we're two separate companies, but owned by the same parent company. We have a relationship, obviously, with Billboard, where Billboard uses all of our data and we create the charts that Billboard publishes on a weekly basis. So all of the data information we collect, we then build charts that Billboard publishes online in their magazine. Billboard does create rules around the data of titles for eligibility on those charts. That's not our rules. It's what Billboard deems if certain rules have to meet certain criteria in order to be eligible for their charts. And so those are rules that we enforce when it comes to the data that we're collecting. that ultimately get displayed on their charts on a weekly basis.
What would be an example of a rule that could potentially like me as an artist or whatever that could impact me and cause maybe confusion or clarity?
Well, I mean, there was a rule back in the day where, you know, it was a pretty significant one. Then when we removed it, there was a point when um, artists and management and labels, they were bundling tickets and album sales together, right? When you bought a ticket, you can also, they would say, hey, you can also buy an album with your ticket. And a lot of times they were bundled together. And what we're trying to measure is what was the intent of the consumer, right? At the end of the day, when someone's going to buy a ticket to a concert, their intent is they want to go see the show, not necessarily that they're going to buy the album, right? As part of that experience. So, in people's, there was some manipulation that was going on, you know, that people were using that as a way to try and increase their chart position on the Billboard charts by bundling albums in the purchase of tickets. So Billboard created a rule and said that's not allowed anymore, right? That, hey, as of X date, you know, we will not accept sales eligible for our charts that where albums are bundled with tickets. So that's just an example of a rule.
Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, I continue to be fascinated by this data. I mean, I just want to clarify, we are talking about, or we're trying to talk about US sales data, not global data. We're trying to narrow the focus on just vinyl album sales, which can often be mixed together with physical sales, which also include CDs. So sometimes you'll see physical sales up or down, and some portion of that is vinyl, but we're trying to micro focus on the vinyl. And I want to pull us back to this slide for those that are watching on the video. It's the last year of vinyl album sales, excluding independent stores. And the big standout is 2019 to 2020. There was a 46% jump in vinyl sales in the US. And Billy, I think you had
Brian, I just want to, I'm sorry to interrupt you, Brian, but I just wanted to note when you mentioned that the year-to-date figures on this are the only ones that don't include independent record store sales. So the year-to-date 2024 versus 23, that's the only portion of these numbers here that don't include the independent. All the other year-end figures represent everything, including independent record store sales.
I got you. So this was just to help standardize the back 8 years that we're looking at on this slide to give more of a standard outlook. It's not the total, but okay. But yeah, let's just talk about the trend of 2019 to 2020, because there was a big jump there. There was another big jump about 10 years before that, but let's just focus on what happened in 2019. I think, Billy, you had some.
Well, I think what you would like me to talk about is sort of what happened between 19 and 20.
Yeah.
So essentially, we all know that the pandemic happened in 2020. So a lot of the conversation, a lot of the narrative around that growth in 2020 was about, well, we had this pandemic and everybody stayed at home and they had more money in their pocket and everybody went to .coms and they bought lots of records because they had time to kill. And I'm not going to say that none of that happened, but I am going to point out that when you look at 2020, and especially the first 11 or 12 weeks of the year before at least the US locked down and had people stay at home, the vinyl market was actually up 43% in those first 10 or 11 weeks. So when I look at how the years progress, typically what I would do over the last, again, 18 years, because I've been doing this since 2008, I like to look at what happens in the weeks following Christmas from the previous year. And that's usually how I look at my own sort of internal gut prognostication about, hey, what's this next year going to be, by looking at what happened from the last gift giving season. Because people that receive turntables as a Christmas gift buy records. And by the way, when you look at sort of what's happened with turntable sales over these same periods, they will tell you the same thing. They'll tell you that the unit counts are up. The last year I think was not as up as much as it was in years previous, but that's the same with vinyl as well, right? You're getting back to sort of a normal behavior of how the market works. But that's what I'd be looking at. I'd be looking at what's the first 5 or 6 weeks of the next year after the holidays. What's happening? What's going on with this, the adoption of the format? And certainly what happened in 2022, things happened. So you had essentially a lot of younger buyers coming in for the first time in those first few weeks of 2020, which was driving sales up dramatically from the year previous. Pandemic shut it all down. And so on top of this natural adoption that occurred from 19 to 20, you then have the rest of the world wake up to, oh, here's something I can do that's really emotionally edifying during a time of stress and sort of unknowns about the future. So I think that, what built into 2020 through 2022 essentially began as a very natural adoption of the format in those first 10 or 11 weeks of 2020. So yes, pandemic had a lot to do with those 3 years of growth, astronomical growth, frankly. But let's not set aside the fact that it was already doing something quite naturally in that first quarter of 2020. Typically, I mean, look, you can't set aside Taylor Swift and say like, oh, she didn't have anything to do with any of this, because I mean, her re-recording her catalog and re-releasing it on vinyl has been a huge movement in the market for sure.
Mm-hmm.
And you can see that every single year. She's at the top of the chart. She's selling just millions and millions of records. And I think that that's one of the reasons why you have both sort of a higher adoption of females buying the format. Like if you think about old crusty guys like myself, used to be old guys sitting in their, basements, listening to records and that's kind of all they did. The buyer of the vinyl format is vastly different from what it was 15 years ago. And certainly Taylor Swift has a lot to do with it. So does pop music in general. We are in an age of pop music. So whether it's Taylor or it's Melanie Martinez or it's Charlie XCX, I think that you have a lot of pop records that are coming out that the younger buyers are really both collecting but also playing.
On that same note, Chris, from Luminate's perspective, as far as data collecting on consumer purchasing trends, is like an artist like Taylor Swift considered an outlier in the information that is given because she holds like such a strong portion of the purchasing market?
Yeah, I mean, she's just unique from any other artist. You look at the amount of physical products that she sold this year, with her latest release, her debut week, which was just a monster week. That first week, she, there was 900,000 vinyl album sales that first week of her new album. Now, a good chunk of those were pre-orders, that she ran, but still, that's a huge, huge number. 900, that's insane, right? And, year to date this year, for an artist to represent a certain percentage of sales is, a very, very small number is even huge, right? But when you look at Taylor and the amount of vinyl albums she sold this year, comparison to all vinyl albums, she's approaching basically 10% of all vinyl album sales, year to date. That's for one artist, I think she's at like 9% roughly, somewhere around there. But for one artist to represent such a huge, even though it is a single digit, that's still a huge number for one artist to sort of account for. So
would I be incorrect in saying that Taylor Swift is the vinyl revolution?
Brian.
I kind of like that you've taken it in this direction, Brian, because I think that there's something about it that that gets lost in the detail, right? Which is, yes, she's a huge part of the expanding of the adoption of the format, 100%. Mm-hmm. You've got to give her a nice medal that she can wear around her neck. Like, yes, absolutely. Vinyl format champion, for sure. But I think that when you look at how many records she sells, I mean, I just was looking at the total vinyl sales in the most current week. It was 729,000 units. So yeah, it's a big number when Taylor Swift sells 900,000 records in a week. But the reality is like, okay, well, that's a week of sales. And we have 52 weeks of sales.
Right.
And we are selling millions and millions and millions of albums over the time period when she's been re-releasing all of her albums. When you start to look at the grand total of the records that are reported by the RIAA and the IFPI and Luminate's sales across the counter, it's a small percentage of the total. We're selling untold millions of records that are not Taylor Swift, not only in units, but also in titles and genres. So I think that it's incredibly important from a sort of a market awareness aspect of like, you can put her up there into any story and you're going to get eyeballs. You're going to get just people reading about the format and about what's going on in the market. But I mean, I think that at the same time, you equally have to talk about Sub Pop's Loser Edition records that they put out on a regular basis. And you have to look at what Blue Note's doing with the Tone Poets. And you have to look at what Rhino's doing with the Rhino Hi-Fi titles. And you have to look at like all the ways in which the business is reacting to the rise of the format. And they're looking at it in all the ways in which you can break out niches and really connect to fans. So I think that, it's absolutely true. She is a champion of the format, and she's really helping us to make that format be more widely accepted. But man, there's a long tail that the format benefits, and that benefits.
Well, I do want to get some context for the Taylor Swift fans that are out there. She has 6 of the top 10 best-selling albums right now, and if you just look at the top 10, she outsells everyone else in the top 10 by like 10-1, something like that. But then, like you said, Billy, there's a long tail of, and that's what was kind of counterintuitive to me, is that vinyl seems to be this long tail business. Although it's driven by Taylor Swift at the top, the other 90% of the market is driving 30-something million album sales in the US.
Yeah, no, exactly.
Chris, is that?
Yeah. I mean, typically it's no secret. Obviously, vinyl album sales has always been very catalog driven, right? It's always been catalog and very deep catalog in the past, right? So, and it still is today. It's still, I think the number is, I was doing it before, 63% of all vinyl album sales year to date are catalog titles, right? So those are titles that are older than 18 months, of release. So it's still a business that's not taking into account what Taylor's new release, right? It's taking into account all those titles that Billy was referencing to, and all those titles that were released out in the 90s that were on very limited editions that people are reissuing and putting out now that people are buying. You have now all the younger demographic consumers in the marketplace, that are now buying a lot of these titles, and I think what's also helped this, while 37% are current, titles when it comes to vinyl for the sales this year to date. I know personally, just looking at the marketplace, and maybe Billy can put a date on it, but when did record labels start putting out releases on vinyl for basically all releases, right? I think that had something that played a part in this growth. I think in the past you had limited titles that were in comparison to today, and I could be wrong, but I think the amount of titles that were on vinyl and new titles that were on vinyl versus how many new titles today that are available on vinyl is drastically different.
Oh man, yeah.
Well, I mean, Chris,
and most releases today come out with a vinyl version, right? They'll have a vinyl variant.
Right. And you're right that there's obviously a lot more available. I think that one of the reasons, though, that we have a 37-63 split is because a vast amount of music that's released as new music today never even comes out physically. I think it's a short-term view of sort of the way the business behaves, but it's also a reality of the way in which tracks are consumed, whether it's discovery on TikTok or it's actually through whatever other real social platform, post, whatever, however it's getting into the ears and the minds of the people that are music fans, right? So I think that part of that catalog new release has to do with the fact that there are many things that don't come out physically. The other thing I'd add is that you're absolutely correct that today we don't really have I'm going to sort of talk out of both sides of my mouth right now, right? Today, for the most part, you don't have a list of titles that are unissued, right? There's a handful of things that still exist that people are like, when's that going to come out on LP? When's that reissue going to happen? There are some of those records, but by and large, when you look at what's been released as new releases and been released as reissues, we don't have a shortness or a short supply of vinyl titles that are available. And especially when you look at the way in which sort of the rest of the world deals with public domain releases and the records that get produced outside, like you literally can get your hands on pretty much anything that you want. Now, some of that is absolutely counterfeit bootleg material, but it's still being produced new and put into the market. Now that doesn't count into Chris's Luminate totals when they total the consumer market, because they have to be officially issued UPCs, et cetera, et cetera. So a lot of that happens without it being captured, but it certainly is out there and exists. So I think that both of those things can be true at the same time, and frankly, they are.
Interesting. Yeah, I mean, I just want to pull us back to kind of how we started the conversation, and how there was a misreporting and a reweighting of the counting. I think we can all agree that Luminate's trying to most accurately count every album sold. I guess I have a question on how are they actually making or pressing 40 million albums a year, and how much is actually being pressed? Or is there a back catalog that they're over producing and then it's getting spread out over years? Do you have any insight in that, Billy?
I think right now in the industry, it's accepted that the total number. So I'm gonna have to explain a couple things. So when you talk about a finished good of a record, you have the raw vinyl units that go into that record. Then you have a finished good that is the final product, the final jacket record package, right?
Right.
So a 2 LP is 2 pieces of raw vinyl that make a finished good. That's 1 LP, right? That's one package. So we're counting what's actually sold in the finished good, not the raw vinyl units.
And that counts as one sale, right? The one
Correct.
sale, if it
Correct.
double LP.
So a 2 LP is
at a consumer level, yes.
Yeah, at a consumer level, yes. So right now, it's pretty much accepted that globally there is a capacity to produce about 350 to 400 million raw vinyl discs.
So that makes sense.
Now that's paper capacity. That's what you line up when you look at how many plants, how many presses, how many days, how many hours, et cetera, right? So the reality of what is actually produced is not to that degree, because obviously you can have paper capacity of 100 million discs. Let's just pretend a plant can make that many. But you're actually, due to the demand coming in from your order book, you only need to make half of that. So the paper capacity and the actual press capacity are two different things, and it always moves, right? So I'm speaking to this, by the way, as one of the things I didn't mention to you. One of the hats before we started recording that I wear is I'm also the Warner Music Group's member of the Vinyl Alliance. I'm a board advisor to the Vinyl Alliance. So that is that's a group of, it's not a trade group, but it's a group of like-minded individuals that touch on all aspects of the value chain of vinyl. So from mastering engineers all the way through to retail, we have members that talk about what the format's doing and how we actually continue to elevate that format in this digital world we live in.
Right.
So as part of that, I have access to talking to people that run plants and dealing with people that sell PVC compound, the sort of the building blocks of what it takes to make a record. So that sort of paper capacity is sort of what we all in the business agree to as being sort of, that's sort of the top of the level that it is right now. And what I'd say is there is no shortage of being able to make a record. Depending on where you make your record, that specific plant could in fact be backed up a bit more than normal, but typically the turn times are all back to normal. There isn't some waiting line to try to get anything made like it was during pandemic. And certainly during pandemic, the entire world ordered more PVC than they needed at the plant level. Companies probably made more records than they necessarily needed to sell in that specific calendar year. And then retailers probably bought more records than they could probably sell in their normal period of time, because they were trying to account for the fact that they couldn't get things in the normal time period. So if you go back to 2020 to 2020, say early 2023, you're dealing with a time period where sort of that equilibrium between supply and demand, what could be pressed, what could be purchased, what could be sold, was very, very, very hard to actually understand, control, maintain. So we are living in that post period now, all up and down the value chain of vinyl, from PVC suppliers all the way through to retailers. And we're all sort of coming to that equilibrium to that point now and dealing with that process. But I think the thing that's interesting to me is that even in all of that, and you could probably look at it and say like, oh, we all overproduced, we all built too much capacity, maybe we reacted too much to that crazy growth from 2020 and 2021. I'd say that when you look at retail across the globe, what you see is people are still adopting the format. It's still growing into a new generation of buyers. People that are committed to the format continue to buy. And there are challenges. I'm not going to pretend like it's all fantastic, everything's perfect. There's still a lot of things that we need to be aware of to just keep an eye on threats and make sure that we're planning for those things accordingly. But it is still the most dynamic sort of physical attribute that is either on one side people call a merch item, and other people call like the premier listening experience that you can have around music.
Mm-hmm.
I tend to line up with the latter, by the way. I think it absolutely is. It's the preeminent way, the high-end performance way to listen to music. It sort of gets into your biological function in a way that no other type of music does for me. And I think that, what you can see, like from what you're putting on the screen now, when you look at the other territories and how they've performed over those years of 2020 to 23, you can see that this wasn't also just a US thing. This is actually a global phenomenon. It actually continues to grow into markets that were late to the early years of the vinyl renaissance back in the early 2010s. And it continues to grow in a really healthy and dynamic way. Problems be damned. We'll keep forging forward, trying to do the right thing and the smart thing as much as we can.
Chris, I'm going to let you chime in a moment, but I just want for our audio listeners, I just want to go over some of the key stats that Billy was referring to. 18 straight years of vinyl US growth, 120% growth between 2020 and 2023, and growth all over Europe, up 58% in UK, 74% in France, 61% in Germany, 115% in the Netherlands. But so, I mean, the trend is clearly 18 straight years of growth. This is a separate tracking. Vinyl Alliance tracks separately than Luminate. Is that?
Yeah, this is some talking points we prepared. This is all from IFPI, publicly available data from the IFPI. So this has to do with the shipments outbound from the recorded music entities around the globe that go into retail globally. So you're looking at by country breakdown as to what's been reported to be shipped into those territories. And I just want to point out one thing. These percentages that Brian just mentioned are revenue growth percentages. These are not unit growth percentages. But I would say that there's also a correlation between those two things. And when we look at as an example, when you look at even this year, what Chris is showing, the Luminate charts talk about units. So when you look at sort of the correlation between revenue value based on outbound shipments and then sold units through to consumers, there's always this correlation between those two things. And you're still seeing these years of growth, and you're seeing that the current years are positive as well.
Yeah, that's important to note, I feel. I mean, because you could have with the price increases of vinyl, which is, I mean, a new vinyl I'm speaking only about. I mean, you can't ignore the price increases across the board for all formats, but you could have a drop because of how stark some of the price increases have been. You could have a drop in physical units sold, but still a higher revenue.
I do see that Mitch has a opinion about the high prices of some vinyl that he might be seeing in the market that he has now made a comment on, which I appreciate. I do want to mention one thing about it. So when you look at the RIAA mid-year report for this year. So half the year from the RIA, which is, again, measuring outbound shipments from the rep owners, that's all of us, to the market. The revenue growth was 17%, while the unit growth was 10.8%. So there is a little bit of
pocket lining,
truth, accuracy. I'm not sure what Mitch was saying, but maybe there's something in there that you're saying, yes, there is something going on. I mean, look, let's be clear. During pandemic, the price of every single aspect of making a record,
it was insane. It was insane, actually.
From the PVC compound to corrugate shortages to container shortages when we're shipping records across the ocean on ships. I mean, we literally had to fight for every single thing that we could get done during those years. And a lot of those costs have come down, but none of them have come down to what they were prior to the pandemic.
And won't go back.
I think that there is an aspect of sort of the market says, and in fact, this was part of this story around, vinyl sales are down 33.33%. And by the way, I just want to mention about that. I think the reason why it was finally picked up by whoever the blogger was that picked it up is because it was down 33.33%, which is obviously the 33 RPM of a record. I mean, you couldn't ignore it. I'm sorry, but that's not a coincidence. Someone saw that and was like, I'm going to make a cheeky post because it's down, whatever. No, I have no proof of that. I'm just saying, like, there's no coincidences. Come on.
And these are half year numbers down that he was referencing.
Well, again, regarding the whole down thing is the fact that, like, you're dealing with two different data sets that are not the same data set at all. And so what would have happened had he said, oh my God, these data sets show that vinyl sales are up 49.8%? We would have said the same thing. That's not an accurate number. So the whole argument that we have had, both between Chris and myself, sort of with the journalistic apparatus that reported on this story, is that we want accuracy in what the market is actually doing, and we want to give you the best pieces of it that we possibly can. We don't want to misrepresent it. We're not trying to tell a story just so we all feel good about it. Like, we're all involved in making sure that the format growth continues and is healthy, and we do this for the Generation Alpha, the next group of kids coming up. We want them to find records for the first time and be enamored with them just like we were, right? There's a continuity to that is something that we're striving for. So whether it's reported erroneously high or erroneously low, we want to come back and say, no, here's what it really is.
Hey, Chris, what do you say to, I've spoken, I got a handful of pretty close friends that own record stores and XYZ. What do you say to the conversations that I've had that's like, well, you can't actually track the impact of the consumer power of the vinyl record if you don't count the used market? And that's not shown in these numbers because this is all talking about new album purchases. How do you address that to the used crowd, or that amount of dollar set that the used market takes up? I mean, it's got to be insane.
Yeah, I mean, it's never been part of our measurement, going back to the beginning of SoundScan in 1991. So,
okay.
It's never been used has never been something that's ever been tracked before.
But Chris, if I might just jump in for a second. Part of the reason why that is, though, is because frankly, we're not selling used records.
Right.
The market is actually in the business of making new records, new CDs, new cassettes, whatever, new digital releases, new streaming tracks, right? We are on the hunt constantly for what is it that the ears of the public would like to hear next? What is that going to be? So we're in the business of making and selling new. But we also understand, at least some of us in the business that actually collect records and are a part of it and actually are in it day to day, understand that what we're doing is simply folding in the next generation of new record or used records for the next generations that come up that want to buy records.
Absolutely.
That maybe aren't at the same price as new, right? So, like, there's I use the word continuity a lot when I talk about the business itself, but what we're doing today is making used records for 10 years from now. And we have to be aware of that, because the things that we're making don't have a normal end of life scenario where it's like, oh, I'm done with that and it's gone. No, what
Right.
happens is you collect, you put it on a shelf, you take it to your local record store, you get some cash, you might trade it for something else,
Right.
buy a new record as a result of it, right? So what I would say is, if you really want to know, and if the audience really wants to know about the used market, then Discogs is exactly the place you should go and the people you should talk to. And Chris from Luminate and Jeffrey and the team over at Discogs, we're all in the same conversations about what's going on. So when we want to have a full understanding of what the market really is doing, we start with new. Chris and I will have conversations, and then it's like, okay, well, how do we wrap in the guys at Discogs to find out, hey, what's the used market looking like? And the thing is that Discogs does not tell you what is new and what is used. They're giving you what it is that they're moving through their platform on a yearly basis. But basically what we do, or at least what I do, I can't say we, I should say what I do, is I look at Discogs as additive to Luminate. Now, there is going to be some duplication in there based on who is selling on Discogs and if they're reporting those sales in Illuminate.
Yeah,
but
sure.
Essentially, I'm not even interested in trying to figure that out because it's the Venn diagram of those two things is going to be so small it won't really matter. So I can just take the two of those and say, here it is. The other thing too is if you talk to record stores, they'll tell you like, oh, I sell 10 used to every new, or I sell 20 used to every new. And you can start to understand how absolutely enormous the vinyl market is, which, by the way, if we think about it, is the exact reason why we should be making new records, to put into that ecosystem, to be a part of that ongoing process and continuity, to like continue to, expose music fans to more and more of what they love.
Chris?
Yeah, I mean, we provide a service for the industry as based on what our clients and what the industry is, the strategy of the industry, right? And that's all about new products, right? Releasing new albums from new artists that are being signed by record labels and so forth, right? So it's been all about new products and how consumers' behavior is around those products. It's really interesting. It would be really interesting to see what that total universe looks like on the used side of the marketplace. It definitely would be a curious trend to look at, but we continue to look at just the new market, right, of what new products that are released into the marketplace. And there's more and more people that are carrying products now than ever before when it comes to physical products. There have been some retailers that have gone out of business over the years and so forth, but then new non-traditional type outlets pop up and start carrying physical music products. You have your Hot Topics and your Urban Outfitters of the world carrying vinyl products. You still, as we've mentioned before, independent record stores are just, 41% of all vinyl album sales. It's a huge percentage of what happens and where consumers go to buy their music. And that's why we've put really a big emphasis, over the last 6 months to really make sure that segment of the market is accurately represented. It's because it is such a meaningful percentage to the overall marketplace, especially when it comes to vinyl albums.
So
and I think about go right ahead, Brian.
Sorry, I just want to harp on the independent record store tracking, which seems to be very difficult. I think Billy said there's maybe 1,800 of them.
Yeah, we've actually been doing work with Record Store Day on that, and with Street Pulse on trying to really hone in on really what that number is, and we're getting close to getting to a better universe of the number. Yeah.
So is this a question of you have to call them up? You have to call them up individually. They have forms. How does this tracking work? And why is it so difficult in this age of AI and data to pull this out?
I mean, traditionally over the years, and again, I started back in the 1994, right? And it was difficult to track independent record store sales back then. And it still is today, to the point because technology, a lot of the mom and pop independent record stores don't have a point of sale system, right? And that's probably the biggest hurdle is the fact of, how they're running their business in the store from a technology standpoint. they have no way to provide us with the information that we need. And while it's minimal at what we ask on a given week, it still takes the ability to send us that information in some, format electronically. So, and ultimately that's where we partnered with Street Pulse over, these last 6 months, that had additional software in place that worked with more point of sale companies, and was able to aggregate and collect that information directly from those stores. And where before we had, 3 or 4 POS companies that were compatible with SoundScan and Luminate, and there was stores that were trying to fit a certain format of how we needed the data in. Street Pulse did have additional capabilities of reaching a larger audience of stores based on their technology, and it made it easier for those stores to report to us through now Street Pulse. And so that's our main partner now when it comes to the independent record stores. Is we work together with Street Pulse and Record Store Day and the record companies themselves also, to really make sure that they understand the importance of reporting, right? And the latest thing in today's independent record store world, as far as how record labels are working with those stores, is throwing listening parties, right? This is a fairly new thing of which is been a tremendous thing for fans and of artists and music,
Right.
To be able to go to a store and listen to the album before it comes out, right? And so we're working with the labels, and Warner's been one of the leaders in helping bring this to fruition, is trying to use those listening party events to show the stores how important it is to have their sales reported to us, right? Because not every store that's taking part in these listening parties actually reports to us. So it's the message out there to these stores is that it's important. It's extremely important for every single, no matter if you sell 5 records or 500 records, it's important for those to be counted, measured by us. That ultimately is going to help the artist and the label, do what they need to do at the end of the day.
So the current methodology with independent record stores, is that just tracking aggregate unit sales, or are you getting individual titles from
everything. We collect everything at a UPC level. So an individual title level, obviously a title can have multiple UPCs, right? I mean, especially when you come to vinyl, one can be black, one can be, a colored vinyl, a multicolored picture disc. So each one of those versions has a different UPC. So we collect everything at a UPC level and at a zip code level. So we can properly in our system report back on, okay, this is the total aggregate of sales on this title. But if you want to see the individual versions or variants of this record, you can see, hey, what did the pink vinyl do versus the standard black or the deluxe version, or the exclusive version that was at independent record stores, right? How did that perform versus and what did that represent of the total sales on that record for the week? And where did it sell? What markets was it in? Boston, Chicago, New York, Nevada, like all over, where we track across 200 markets across the US. The data is broken out in Luminate.
I got you. So you are able to track UPC level for a small percentage of independent record stores. And from my understanding, you were weighting that. You were getting like 10% of the 1,800, and then you were weighting that towards the total.
So that's what modeling represents, and the old weighting represents. Now, while you say it's 10% of the number of stores, the volume is much higher, right?
Okay, you took the top highest independent stores,
right? The most of the stores, the largest stores, we have the largest stores reporting to us. We're really not missing anybody when it comes to the larger independent record stores. It's the smaller stores that really were underrepresented, right, in our coverage, and that's where we implement the modeling or the weighting to account for those stores that don't report to us. But it's something that's ongoing every day. We work with Street Pulse and Record Store Day every day, and record labels to say, hey, who should we be going after? Who out of these 1,300 or 1,200 stores that don't report, who are the next set of most important reporters, right? And let's go chase them, and let's see if they have the technology that's capable of reporting through Street Pulse ultimately into Luminate. So it's a difficult task.
Right.
It's
So
not
it
as
sounds like
easy.
if you're adding, it sounds like if you're adding more actual numbers and less weighting, that's going to change everything going forward and backwards, because you're not looking at, I mean, going forward, it'll start to get better, but going backwards, it excluded things that you're now tracking. You see what I'm getting at? Like you're changing the
Mhm.
formula every
Oh,
time you add a
100%.
new.
I mean, that it's
Yeah.
all towards on the path towards more accuracy. I mean, that's you're right. I mean, we have a long time period before we can actually start looking at year over year and having the same modeling against the same modeling, so we
Right.
can really start looking at what we've done to improve it. But yeah, I mean, to Chris's point, like, yeah, we have to call these stores directly. We have to work with Record Store Day, which is a fantastic partner. They're out there as an advocate for these stores across the country. And we're doing it on a regular basis. All of our marketing emails, as an example, on the bottom say, "Do you report to Street Pulse? If you don't, here's the link. Go do it." Like we need everybody in. And to Chris's point about the smaller stores, this is the part that's tough, because on one hand, you're asking these stores to make time and monetary investment to be able to report, which
Right.
might be very difficult for them to do. And then we say, well, hey, look, we need your data. We need to know what you're doing so that we can do more of the things we do that we bring to you. But if you can't, then you can't be a part of it. And then we look like the terrible people that it on the surface, it kind of looks like we are. Like, but aren't you here to support independent record stores? It's like, we absolutely are. But we're in 2024. We're selling records in a digital world, and we need every bit of ammo that we can have at our disposal to say, this is vitally important. This justifies all the work and time and effort and resource that we put into it. And the
Right.
more people that we can have coming to the party and explaining what it is that we're doing, the better we can prepare for whatever the next iteration of our business is. And that includes continually put these physical goods into physical record stores to make connections with fans in real life.
Right.
And that's sort of the goal of all of this. In the
So-
end. And listen, I'm sorry, I have got to go. I've got a 1:30 that I got to jump to.
Okay.
So if there's anything you need to ask me before I have to leave, now is the
Yeah.
time.
I mean, this is my last question. So
Okay.
like you said, Warner Music needs to know this data to basically accurately predict how many albums to produce, what artists are trending, right?
Sure.
Like that's the other reason. Is there a revenue reason back to the artist that this has to be tracked? These sales have to give royalties back to
Well,
songwriters.
that's based on
Is that it?
shipments from us. So
That's
it's not
okay.
as vital. I mean, certainly it matters when it comes to RIA certification processes,
Mhm.
where you look at like a net shipment number, you look at your total stream count. So like as artists receive gold or platinum discs, certainly accuracy in what it is that's been sold, because those aren't all determined on just what is shipped. Those numbers are determined also on
Right.
what actually gets through to consumer, right? So
Right.
I think that is certainly very important.
Got you.
Well,
So,
thank you, Billy,
yeah.
for being here, man,
Thank
for
you,
this.
Billy.
And I do have a follow-up question for Chris. If you have a couple more minutes, Chris, after Billy pieces out of the session here. But Billy Fields, Vice President of Sales there at Warner Music Group, thanks for the time today, man. We'll talk to you again soon.
Yes, you
Thank
will.
you.
Good to see you both. Nice to meet
All
you,
right.
Brian. Chris, good to see you as always. 2 calls
Yes,
in
Billy.
one day.
Thank
I
you,
know,
Billy.
right?
Yes.
Check you later, man.
See you.
Thanks.
Take care, Billy.
Bye-bye.
Chris, the as we wrap here, the question I have a million questions in my head, but just thinking about the ecoustics platform and knowing with the hi-fi like shows that I've covered with in California and Chicago and the stuff with acoustics and we talk a lot about reissues and hi-fi quote unquote audiophile reissue type of stuff, and those all being brand new records. Is there a way that if a passionate consumer would like, man, I buy all these new records, like I can give that data to Luminate, like I could do something. Is there a way for consumers to partake in the process as they buy a new record, or is that only on the stores for now?
Yeah, it's our strategy is taking it from the stores. You can't expect
Sure.
the consumer to report, that I guess you're going back to almost like the surveys that Nielsen, right, used to do with the TV ratings, filling out like those surveys, right, of what they watched on TV, right?
Well, I mean, kind of though, but Google reviews, I mean, you have a ton of independent people that voluntarily give their opinions on a store, and
Right, but
that's
you
all
don't
there.
know if, I mean, anybody can say I bought the record, right, and just write a
Sure.
Google review and say, oh, I love this record, right? They're a fan of the artist, right? They know,
Mhm.
hey, if my review is going to count towards a sale, you're going to have. It's just not an accurate way
That makes
to
sense.
truly represent
Right.
the numbers, right? So you really need it from the point of sale, where the point of sale
Mhm.
takes place, and that's where SoundScan was started, right? Is measuring the point of sale transaction, and that's what at
Right.
Luminate, what we deem a sale, right? When the consumer actually has that product in their hands, and that data is taken directly from our data providers, and that's
My-
the relationship. We don't scrape data, like other services might be doing in the industry, and we have direct relationships with every single data provider, whether it's physical, digital streaming, or AirPlay. That data comes directly to us.
My-
Right.
My
So
final question on that exact line. So that's really cool to know. And I've been at the Making Vinyl conference a few times, and just been involved in conversations with. I work a lot in the vinyl record industry. Right behind me in the video is my record lathe, and so the. Another question I have though, because in those groups, and even at hi-fi audiophile shows too, the topic of quality comes up all the time. And so as you're working with independent record stores on trying to get a more accurate and overarching viewpoint of how many new records are actually going into people's homes, are you tracking it the opposite way of like how many returns are coming in?
Oh yeah,
There's data on
definitely.
that.
Yeah, it's all part of what we get from our
That's pretty
data
cool.
providers.
That's
So
cool to
when
know.
someone goes, whether it's at an independent record store or someone goes into Target and returns something or whatever,
Mhm.
returns are all included into the sales information that we receive on a daily and weekly basis. So
That's
that's
cool.
all accounted for. Yeah.
I'm glad I
So
asked. Thanks.
Yeah, so that's included in our numbers and in the tallies, and at the end of
Because
the
how else do you gauge quality? Because it doesn't have to be just like an opinion based thing. If people are returning stuff because things are damaged, like how does
Oh,
the
yeah.
industry look into itself and its processes if that's not available? So
yeah, and there's not many returns that occur, but
Right.
if there are, there are, and those are accounted for and included,
That's cool.
and subtracted from the totals in essence.
Sure.
So
Well, Brian,
Yeah, so I have an outlook question. Well, it seems like the problem is counting physical albums. Like they arrive in the record store and then they leave the record store. So,
mhm.
I mean, this is a very simple way of explaining this, but why can't there be like an inventory count day where record stores on the first of the year, they do their inventory, what they have, and then the last day of the year, I know they can't do this like every week, like you probably want the data, but just to have an end of year data. Okay, we had these in, now these are out. So we can say these sold. Obviously, some could have been stolen, but nevertheless, you have an accurate count on one day of the year. And then that could be reported. But is that too simple of a
Yeah, that's
solution?
probably too simple of a notion. Plus, our industry is
You want
needs
day by
to react.
day. Yeah.
You need the industry wants to react to what's
Right.
happening as quickly as possible, right? So, back in the day, it started, weekly was like, wow, to have weekly data was amazing, and then
Okay.
when we switched to daily, I forget what year it was that we went daily, and it was like people were just blown away, right? Everybody was like, wow, this is great having daily data. They can react to it, right? And you can see the impact of things, right? When an artist performed a live show, right? You can see, hey, leading up to that show, what's happening around the consumption of that artist's music leading up, and then after the fact, what happened, right? Across all forms of consumption, whether it was physical albums or digital sales or streaming activity, and all of those behaviors act slightly differently. But you can now measure the impact having daily data of and really see the effect of your marketing campaigns and your efforts for promoting an artist and their music. To really, to get to see that on a daily basis. And, it's pretty funny because you go from weekly to daily, and then the record companies are like, okay, now how many times a day can we see it? It's like, daily's awesome, but it's like, okay, now can you update it twice a day? It's like,
Right.
no, no.
Right.
Well,
Everybody
I think
wants
that,
things faster, right? How real time can you
Right.
get
So
it? But
if you could magically fix this, would it be giving a standard POS to every independent record store? Is
if there
that the
was a
solution?
way, if there was a solution to be able to have every independent record store have and even then using today's technology, have every record store just have a Square device in their store, right? I mean, because now Street Pulse has software that works with Square. So
Okay.
so anybody that even has a Square, and how much does a Square device cost the store at the end of the day, right? I mean, and to be able to use a Square device in the independent record store would enable them to report their data into Street Pulse and ultimately into Luminate. So technology is helping there, and I think, and we're seeing that. We're seeing a lot of
Right.
independent stores adapt to bringing on a Square or using Shopify as a back end
Gotcha.
and that also Shopify's anybody who's using that is eligible to report through Street Pulse and into Luminate. So technology is making it a little bit easier. And the fact, I want to mention that, when stores report through Street Pulse, the time factor is gone. Like when reporting to SoundScan, there was a manual process that a store owner had to do on a weekly basis. So now with Street Pulse technology, that when a store gets brought on and set up, it's automated. So a store owner doesn't have to do anything. So once the process is set up in there with whatever POS that they're using, the data automatically gets pulled from their store every single day into Street Pulse, which then sends us a file every day of all the stores. So it's taken that time factor away, and store owners are loving it, right? They're
Right.
like, because they're wearing, Billy wears a few hats, I wear a few hats. These guys are wearing 18 million hats, right? They're as store owners of a record store. So any 15 20 minutes you can free up of their time, they greatly appreciate it. And now that capability is there in reporting to Street Pulse and to Luminate. So we're making great strides. Like I said, we have more stores now reporting from the independent record store sector that's ever been reporting, going back to the beginning of SoundScan. And we're not stopping here. It's, we want as many stores reporting as possible. Ultimately, would we love to just do away with modeling? Yeah, I mean, but we need a lot more stores to report in order to
So I mean, it sounds like you just said if they switch over to a Square point of sale terminal, they will automatically be included in the data.
No, they still have to sign up.
Oh, they still have to
not
sign
automated.
up.
You still have to, you still have to, reach out to Record Store Day, Street Pulse, Luminate to say, hey, we want to report. And then Street Pulse has to actually go and electronically,
Sure.
Gotcha.
get
But are there any
that store.
incentives for the record store, independent record store, to do this, or why aren't they
Yeah,
already
well,
doing it?
they receive data back, from us on a weekly basis. So we provide a number of different charts to them on a weekly basis so they can see what's happening, right? How titles are moving, and see those trends of those titles, which helps them when it comes time to ordering, right? Or say, hey, maybe I'm missing something that's selling in the market that, wow, I didn't know it was selling at this volume. Maybe I should bring this in. I don't have it at all, so that helps them. I think.
Is there some level of competition where they don't want to give the data because they want to keep it private, so they're competing with?
Well, their data is not exposed at a store level. So, like Store A, Cactus Records and Waterloo Records, nobody knows how many units. No store owner is going to know what the other store sold, right? It's always aggregated together. So no one store's information is
okay. So there's not a privacy problem where they're worried that their competitor will know their sales and things like that.
There is a fear. People who never shared information before. There's always a fear of where's my data going and who's going to have access to it. And it's just human nature. Right? We get it. But when you explain to them how it works, if they're not knowledgeable about it, you just explain, hey, this is how it works. Your data is never going to be exposed. It's always aggregated. No competitor is going to see your information, and these are the benefits. And not only from a personal benefit, but from a record store community. It means so much to the entire community to truly be represented. A lot of pressure comes to us to make sure we're accurately representing what's selling, right? But it takes everybody, right? It's not just Luminate that's going to make this change by themselves, right? Everybody's got to help make this happen together. Luminate, Record Store Day, the record companies, Record Store Day, the record community, record store community. Everybody together has to make this happen.
And Brian, too, to what you said, I mean, about the why, like I can definitely see major concerns that I would have as a record store owner about. It would be a big decision for me to sign up for this, because I mean, every state is different with income tax, with inventory tracking.
And we don't get revenue numbers. We only get unit counts. So we have nothing. We don't collect any dollar figures. So there's no, and that's another thing, that people like, oh, I don't want people to know how much money is coming through my store. I'm like, well, we don't care about how much money. We care how many units and what those units were, right? Which titles were they, and how many of those titles did you sell? That's all we care about. The dollars, we've never asked for them to give us dollar information.
Well, that's courteous of you.
I mean, it just seems like a matter of incentives. If the the independent record stores were incentivized in some way to get involved and feel the benefit of it, then you have an industry aligned and more accurate numbers, and makes everybody better.
Yeah, it does. It makes everybody better. It really, again, the importance of how big that the independent record stores as a whole, what they mean to especially vinyl record sales is important. And remember, that's, hey, if someone's all of a sudden hearing sales are down crazy amounts, which they're not, but that affects people then saying, oh, well, should I be buying records? And now, that's going to affect the store business, their businesses, directly, right?
Well, it'll affect stores and all that too. I mean, who else uses this data from Luminate, Chris? Like, I mean, do banks look at this data for loans that they would give out?
Financial institutions use our information to. Everybody, not just the music industry, uses Luminate's information to understand the trends of consumer behavior as it pertains to music and music products. So,
well, with this, I mean, I know that this is a long episode for us here at Ecoustics, and I've got some back end to take care of on this episode. But we could most definitely have a part 2 down the line. I'd love to talk to you next year, Chris, 2025, and see how that's going. It would be really cool to have updates from Luminate. Once a year on the Ecoustics podcast would be really sick, dude. I mean, we got a large audience of physical media purchasers that I think is really neat, especially in the new market. And I think I would also be, remiss if I didn't mention too that, in my opinion, these figures about new record sales are also important for the audio company manufacturers of equipment that we all
hardware
love of our setups. And this kind of stuff is like, oh man, am I going to invest in R&D this year in this new cartridge or in this new pressing machine to excel turnover time, or for quality to raise quality? Without some of these numbers, I mean, you're kind of throwing darts, to see if this is money well spent or not. So I think that there's definitely some validity to the innovation within the industry, to have the vinyl record industry specifically, that this type of new sales data is important to justify, R&D and R&D decisions, and how businesses are spending their money.
And hardware companies, right? So the companies that are making the turntables, right? They're a couple of them were at the Making Vinyl conference and saw my presentation there, and a number of them came up to me and said, this is such great information. You don't understand how important this is to us, because people, when you see sales growing for this format, that's good for the hardware manufacturers, because then
Exactly.
people are going to be buying more turntables. If all of a sudden you start pumping out in the news that, vinyl is dead and all this other nonsense, it's going to take people away from going out and buying those turntables, right? So it's, while you don't think about that initially, the impact of your decision of how we measure and what we measure and so forth affects so many other places, right? Including those hardware manufacturers of turntables, and they're now users of our data, and they absolutely love what we're able to provide as far as insights and trends.
Where would people go, Chris, for any of our listeners that would want to do any personal research or further learning on this topic? Where would you direct them?
Yeah, I mean, they can go to look for Luminate music online, and we have a public site, but it's mainly for a B2B, is mainly what our business is all around. It's not a consumer sort of front end product. It's a B2B service that we do provide for the most part. But Billboard is our partner when it comes to publishing that information, and obviously they've been doing the charts for forever.
Right.
So that's usually the consumer facing entity that people interact with is on the chart side of things.
Well, Brian, do you have anything that you'd like to share in closing before we sign off?
No, fascinating conversation. I think this data is more important than people realize. It's not
extremely important.
It's music, it's culture. It's not, I mean, it sounds simple. We're just counting record units, but it really speaks to the economic and social outlook for the US and for the world. But this is just tracking US right now, and appreciate Chris coming on and talking about this. I was kind of in the hot seat with some explaining some numbers. So I want to thank you for that, Chris. And it's really been good.
My pleasure.
Yeah. And thank you, Billy, who is no longer a part of the conversation, but signed off a couple minutes ago from Warner, Chris Muratore, Director of Partnerships at Luminate, Billy Fields, VP of Sales at Warner Music Group, Brian Mitchell, CEO and founder of ecoustics.com, and I have been your host and active listener this episode, Mitch Anderson, producer Ecoustics, Black Circle Radio, and source of light and power. Thanks for listening, everybody. Please subscribe, leave a comment, and if you have questions and stuff, hit them up on the Ecoustics comment section or wherever, and we can always forward those over to Chris and Billy if we need to do so. Thanks for listening, everybody. We'll check you on the next one.